In the name of God, in this session we will read about other important terms concerning the markedness in typology. The concept of behavioral potential. What we mean by behavioral potential. The second criterion for typological markedness is behavioral potential. Behavioral potential, here we want to define it. Is any sort of evidence from the linguistic behavior of the elements in question that would demonstrate that one value of a conceptual category is grammatically more versatile than the other, and hence is typologically unmarked compared to the other value. This is the definition of behavioral potential. I want to repeat it again. Maybe I ask you about the definition of behavioral potential, or maybe I give you this definition and want you to guess that term. The behavioral potential is any sort of evidence from the linguistic behavior of the elements in question that would demonstrate that one value of a conceptual category is grammatically more versatile than the other, and hence is typologically unmarked compared to the other value. It means that, for example, we have plural and singular. In language, we use more morphological marks and more marks for showing the plural than the singular. Therefore, based on this definition, the plural will be unmarked than the singular. The universal applicability of behavioral potential follow from the fact that any linguistic element has a linguistic behavior. Okay, we say that any linguistic element has a special linguistic behavior. In fact, at a very general level, the goal of linguistics is to characterize the behavior of linguistic element. Behavioral potential can be divided into two general types. You should know that these two types. Okay, behavioral potential can be divided into two general types. Roughly, the morphological criteria and the syntactic ones. One of them is morphological and another one is syntactic based. The morphological type, which we will call that inflectional potential. Dear student, you should know it support inflectional potential and distributional potential. Inflectional potential pertains to number of morphological distinctions that a particular grammatical category possesses. Okay, the inflectional is concerned with the morphological matters and behavior. You should know its definition. By inflectional potential, it means the number of morphological distinctions that a particular grammatical category possesses. The syntactic criterion, which we will call that distributional potential, pertain to the number of syntactic contexts in which a grammatical element can occur. Okay, dear student, therefore, the definition of behavioral potential is important, is to support, is important, inflectional potential and distributional, and their definition, and even you should know that the inflectional is concerned with the morphological behavior and distributional is concerned with the syntactic context. Inflectional potential can be illustrated for the categories singular and plural. Okay, with the third person pronouns of English. Here we want to read example of inflectional potential, which is singular and plural with the third person pronoun of English. Okay, we have singular here and plural. For masculine in English we have he in singular but they in plural. Feminine she but in plural they. Neuter it but its plural form is they. Okay, here for singular we have different pronouns, but all of them are coded just in one form. This chart represents the expression of particular combinations of features of number and gender. Okay, this chart represents the expression of particular combinations of features of number and gender. Okay, in singular you can see the number and gender. For example, you know that he is masculine and is one person. She is feminine and one person. It is neutral. And lists all of the logical possibilities. There is a clear asymmetry in the chart in that the singular has three distinct forms for the three genders, whereas the plural has only one form, okay, here, covering all three genders. In other words, the value singular manifests a three-way morphological distinction of gender. It shows three kinds of gender, but the value plural doesn't show that. The singular has a greater number of distinction than the plural, and hence is typologically unmarked. Okay, here the singular has a greater number of distinction than the plural, and hence is typologically unmarked. Okay, we consider the singular as unmarked because we use here in English more morphological terms and code for singular, but in some language we use the as I gave you that example, we use more code for plural, not for singular. And in the language which we use the more number and more coded, that is unmarked. But here in English you can see that for singular is unmarked than the plural. Conversely, the plural has fewer morphological distinction and is therefore marked. But in the example which I gave you, the plural is unmarked, and singular is marked in some languages. There are a number of observations that can be made about behavioral potential. Okay, dear student, you should know this observation about the behavioral potential, about the characteristics of behavioral potential. Onward, we will read about the characteristics and features of behavioral potential, which you must know that. There are a number of observations that can be made about the behavioral potential. First, the facts about English pronouns given above are not evidence under the structural criterion, since the plural form is suppletive with respect to the singular forms. This demonstrates the greater power and applicability of behavioral potential. Okay, it is the first features, that the applicability and greater power of behavioral potential. The second one, this pattern is only one of the language types allowed by inflectional potential. Inflectional potential allows for languages in which the same gender distinctions are found in both singular and plural. The language type predicted not to occur is a language with gender distinction in the plural but not in the singular. Third, this evidence agrees with the structural coding evidence for the typological markedness of the plural. The concord between structural coding and behavioral potential illustrate the pervasive nature of typological markedness in grammar. The last characteristic of behavioral potential is that the evidence here doesn't tell us anything about the typological markedness of gender, only of number. In order to discover the behavioral potential of the values of gender category, one must compare the rows, not the columns. However, in every row, there are two distinct forms, the singular and plural form. Each gender has the same number of singular plural distinctions. Hence, the inflectional potential of each gender value is equal. In addition, the singular gender forms all suppletive and so on. So one cannot use the structural criteria to determine the typological markedness of gender values either. If one is looking for a structural coding of two or more values in a grammatical category, one must compare the values to each other and count morphemes. If one is looking for the inflectional potential of values in a grammatical category, one must look at the other categories orthogonal to the category in question and count morphological distinction for each value. Identifying inflectional potential involves the comparison of the number of morphological distinctions found for two related categories. Okay, here, dear student, this paragraph gives us some information about finding the inflectional potential, the way of finding inflectional potential. Identify inflectional potential involves the comparison of the number of morphological distinctions found for two related categories. For example, singular and plural. Given that many morphological categories are multi-valued. For example, the many case or tense inflections found in natural languages, the definition of inflectional potential will require the relative quantitative language that we used in defining structure coding. Dear student, here we have the definition of inflectional potential. This is important. If the marked value has a certain number of formal distinctions in an inflectional paradigm, then the unmarked value will have at least as many formal distinctions in the same paradigm. Okay, if the marked, this is the definition of inflectional potential, another definition. If the marked value has a certain number of formal distinctions in an inflectional paradigm, then the unmarked value will have at least as many formal distinctions in the same paradigm. It means that, like the plural and singular in English, which we gave you its example, the number of distinction in unmarked value is more than the marked one. This is the summarization of this definition. Inflectional potential is described in terms of inflectional word forms. Inflectional potential is described in terms of inflectional word form. In many cases, there is a distinction between a morphological and a syntactic expression of a category. For example, one may contrast the inflectional or morphological passive of Latin found in the present system of tenses to the periphrastic or syntactic passive found in the perfect system, as in the first person singular indicative forms of the first conjugation verb aimer. Okay, here you can see the present, imperfect and future form of this verb, which here we have just one mark, which is R, to show the present, imperfect and future. But for perfect system we have the different code. In this case, the same grammatical distinction is made between the active and passive. But in the present system, it is made morphologically, and in the perfect system, it is made syntactically. It is syntactically and it is morphologically. The distinction between morphological and syntactic expression of a relevant construction can be taken as evidence in favor of greater inflectional potential of the form taking the inflection, because the form taking the periphrastic elements can be considered to be inflectionally defective. Okay, the perfect tenses don't inflect themselves for passive, instead they take an auxiliary. Hence, the Latin paradigms give evidence that the present is typologically unmarked compared to the perfect. Okay, this is unmarked because we use just one form, and this is marked. A similar argument may be used to consider a root that has suppletive inflectional forms to have greater inflectional potential than a root which takes regular inflections. For example, one can state that the English pronouns other than you, which is an exceptional case, have greater inflectional potential than the nouns since their plural are suppletive. The pronouns also have case distinctions except for you and it, while common noun don't. Another example of the greater inflectional potential of pronouns. The suppletion criterion can be generalized to the assertion that greater allomorphy or morphological irregularity of any type, not just suppletion, is evidence for the greater inflectional potential for the category in question. The second type of behavioral potential is distributional potential, dear student. The second type of behavioral potential is the distributional potential. This involves determining the number of environments in which the linguistic element in question occurs. This is another definition for that. The distributional potential involves the determining the number of environments in which the linguistic elements in question occur. The element which occurs in a larger number of syntactic environments or construction has the greater distributional potential. Okay, the element which occurs in a larger number of syntactic environments or constructions has the greater distributional potential. We can illustrate this with a well-known example concerning the category of voice in English. Most transitive verbs occur in both the active and passive voice. However, there are a number of verbs which occur in the active voice but don't occur, at least not without some degree of unacceptability, in the passive voice. And there are certain constructions which occur with the active voice but not with the passive voice. Okay, here you can see the example. My brother bought this cabin. This cabin was bought by my brother. That cloud resembles a fish. This is ungrammatical, the passive form of that. A fish is resembled by that cloud. It is not correct. Fred killed himself. Himself was killed by Fred. It is not grammatical. If we consider co-occurrence with by, co-occurrence with resemble, and co-occurrence with a reflexive object as three contexts for the active and passive voice, then we find that the active voice occurs in all three contexts. Okay, we have the active voice. This is the active. This is active. And this is the active. In all of these examples, we have active voice and it is grammatical. While the passive voice occurs in only one of them, in the first. On this evidence, the active voice has a greater distributional potential. It can come in more context and environment. However, there do exist examples of passives in English without obvious active counterparts, like the Romer. These examples suggest weakening the distributional criterion to merely no more context than, instead of a subset of. This renders the criterion too weak in at least one important respect. Let us say that we allow this weaker version. The extreme case of that would be complementary distribution. The major difficulty is determining how to count distributional contexts so that we could say that the number of contexts in which one element is found is more than the number of contexts in which another element was found. Some independent means for individuating and counting morphosyntactic context is required. This may be possible, though it doesn't yet exist. On the other hand, if one set of contexts is a proper subset of the other, then it is clear that the former set of contexts is smaller in number than the latter, no matter how one counts contexts. This strong version of distributional potential is as follows. Okay, here we have another definition of distributional potential. If the marked value occurs in a certain number of distinct grammatical environments, then the unmarked value will also occur in at least those environments that the marked value occurs in. It means that the unmarked value will come in more environments. If the marked value occurs in a certain number of distinct grammatical environment, it means that the marked value just comes in the special environment. The unmarked value will also occur in at least those environments that the marked value occurs in. There are two basic reasons why the distribution of a typological marked value would be more limited or defective in comparison with the corresponding unmarked value. The first reason is that there is some semantic incompatibility between the grammatical category in question and the construction in which it is not found. In English, for instance, process predicates occur in both the simple present and the present progressive, while stative predicates are found in the simple present only. Okay, you can see its example. She sings marigolds. She's singing a marigold. She has red hair. She's having red hair. The limited distribution, the second one, is not grammatical. The limited distribution of the stative predicates is due to the fact that the semantic distinction underlying the simple present or present progressive contracts is relevant only to process predicates. Indeed, the only way in which stative predicates can occur in the progressive in English is if they are reinterpreted as process predicates. She is resembling her mother more and more. She is coming to resemble her mother more and more. He is being a boy. He is acting like a boy. Okay, here you saw another example. This is an example of an asymmetry in distribution due to the semantic factors. Nevertheless, this type of evidence still supports the typological markedness of the stative predicates in predication. Typological markedness represents constraint on the expression of conceptual categories, and so semantic restriction are relevant. Okay, here we can see that the semantic is another factor which affect on the distributional potential and on the grammatically. Typological okay, here typological markedness represent constraint on the expression of the conceptual categories, and so semantic restriction are relevant. In fact, the constructional distinctions found with predication, such as simple present versus the present progressive, are so to speak designed for the typological unmarked value of the category. Dear student, this example are not important for your final exam. We just read this example for you to get the point. In this case, procedural predicates, the cases of semantic incompatibility, are therefore simply another manifestation of typological markedness. The second reason why the distribution of the typologically marked value would be limited is simply that it appears to be an arbitrary fact about a language. For example, in auto-predicated action words, like verbs, inflects for tense, factivity determined by tense and mood and aspect. Like here, he was sitting, used to sit. Predicated property words, adjectives, often called stative verbs, don't inflect for any of these categories. Like here. Here we have this example that he was sitting or used to sit, but here we have this example, my own child is good. This is the translation of that original sentence. One aspect is arguably incompatible with property words, the latter are stative. Tense and factivity are not. It is simply a grammatical fact regarding the predication of stative property words in auto. As such, it provides a strong evidence for the typological markedness of stative predication compared to the process predications. Another matter is neutral values, not a criterion for typological markedness. Okay, we have another value which is neutral. It means that we don't have any criterion for typological markedness. Certain other grammatical criteria have been proposed as manifestations of markedness, at least in the Prague school sense. We may describe them as neutral value criteria. Okay, I want to repeat it again. You should know about the definition of neutral value. Maybe I asked you about the neutral value. Certain other grammatical criteria have been proposed as manifestations of markedness. Certain other grammatical criteria have been proposed as manifestation of markedness, at least in Prague school sense. We may describe them as neutral value criteria. It means that the unmarked value is the one found in neutral context, where the contrast between paradigmatic alternatives doesn't apply for one reason or another. However, we will demonstrate in this section that there is no cross-linguistic consistency as to which value is chosen. Hence, the neutral value criterion is not apparently associated with typological markedness. Greenberg describes one candidate criterion as the facultative use. The form that normally refers to the unmarked value will refer to either value in certain contexts. The common example is the use of Englishman to indicate either the male of the species or the species as a whole, including females. The facultative use doesn't always follow the markedness pattern, however. For example, English they is used to refer to unidentified individuals regardless of number, so that they told me to sit down can be used when only one individual told me to sit down. This suggests that the plural is neutral. It means that unmarked value. Also, a lack of inflectional potential, lack of gender distinction suggests that it is a marked value. In the category of gender, a variety of contexts can be considered facultative, but no single gender is consistently used across languages for this context. For example, in Maasai, feminine gender is used for the reference of unknown gender. Okay, in this language, use the feminine for the unknown gender, but sometimes in English we use the masculine for the unknown, or it for the unknown. Another facultative context is when the referent doesn't have a gender, either because the referent is not denoted by a noun but instead by another part of speech, or because the referent is denoted by a non-linguistic expression. In monominy, if the referent is denoted by a clause, then the inanimate singular gender is used, like here. The fact that you hate me. Here we have the inanimate singular gender. We use the that clause for that. Okay, dear student, by this example we want to make clear the concept of neutral value. In Chichewa, on the other hand, the human singular class one gender is used when the referent is not a word but a sound. He heard a crying son. Another neutral context is gender resolution, where the form for the unmarked value is used in the plural to refer to collections consisting of objects of both unmarked and marked type, usually two distinct genders. An example of gender resolution is the use of the Spanish masculine plural pronoun allows to indicate groups consisting of both men and women. This is another example of the form being employed for an intermediate category, masculine plus feminine. For which there is no separate form. However, gender resolution is just as inconsistent cross-linguistically as other neutral value contexts. For example, in Swahili, if two nouns of different genders are conjoined, the gender value taken is simply that the nearest noun. Like here, the chair and the leg of the table are broken. In Romanian, a more complicated pattern is found for gender resolution of anaphoric pronouns. If one conjunct denotes a male animate, then the masculine is used. If all conjunct are masculine, the masculine is used. Otherwise, the feminine is used. An example of feminine gender is given in this example. You can see its example. Please look at the example just to get the point. In sum, the neutral value context, this paragraph is important, dear student. This paragraph is important. Neutral value contexts don't have any consistent cross-linguistic pattern that can be linked to a structural coding or behavioral potential. The neutral value contexts don't have any consistent cross-linguistic pattern that can be linked to a structural coding or behavioral potential. This conclusion is not entirely surprising. The neutral value criteria differ from structural coding and behavioral potential in nature. The latter two involve a relative quantitative measure of the grammatical properties of the marked and unmarked value. The unmarked value of the category has relatively fewer morphemes and relatively greater inflectional and distributional potential than the marked value. The neutral value criteria, on the other hand, cannot be so relativized. Either the neutral value is the unmarked one or not. These differences in theoretical structure suggest that these neutralization phenomena are not associated with typological markedness phenomena. I think, dear student, it is another important matter is economy and iconicity, but I think it will be so hard for you to get the point. Okay, I want to just I think it is enough until the economy and iconicity, because it will be so hard for you and you will be confused with another new terms. I think it is enough until the economy iconicity. But you're a student. In addition to the booklet of this session, I will upload the whole book for you if you want to read more about the typological matters. In this session, I told you some, and I defined some new terms which are related to the markedness. Please read them, and you must know their definition for the final exam. They are very important. You should know them, and I will ask you about them. If you had any question, please ask me. Okay, therefore, in addition to the booklet of this session, I will upload the whole book, because maybe you need to read more about the matters of this book. Thank you. Please do it task and upload it in model system, and ask your question in WhatsApp. Maybe sometimes you need to read that, you need to look at this video many times to get the point. It is not an easy task to get the point. Look at the example to get the point, but the example are not important for the final exam and even for your summarization. Thank you.